Late one cold November evening, a 36-year-old groundskeeper named Daniel Reeves walked into the abandoned Hawthorne Cemetery, a place he had worked in for 13 years, but had never truly understood. And that night, he carried a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the icy wind scraping against his jacket. He had recently lost his mother, and even though this forgotten cemetery wasn't where she was buried, something about the silence of the place felt familiar to him, almost like grief had carved its own home between the crooked tombstones and collapsing trees. And as he walked past rows of cracked marble slabs, illuminated only by his dim lantern, he noticed something unusual, a grave he had never seen before, one that looked far too fresh to belong in a cemetery abandoned for nearly 5 decades. The soil uneven, dark, and strangely warm, as if someone had dug it recently. Yet the stone at its head was chipped, moss-covered, and old enough that its name had faded away into nothing. Daniel felt that something was deeply wrong, an instinct pressing at the base of his spine. But the moment he crouched down to brush the dirt away, he heard a soft whisper rising from beneath the ground, a trembling voice saying his name in a tone so fragile it sent an electric shiver across his entire body, and he stumbled back, his lantern shaking, his breath hitching as the whisper came again. This time clearer, sadder, and unmistakably familiar. It was his mother's voice, repeating, "Danny, please don't leave me here." And although his rational mind screamed that it couldn't be real, his emotional heart, raw and grieving, desperately wanted to believe it, dragging him toward the grave, even as thick fog crawled across the cemetery floor like something alive. The air seemed to tighten around him, sounds from beneath, like fingernails scratching wood. And the voice, his mother's voice, grew more frantic, begging him, crying to him, telling him she was cold and alone and scared in the dark, her tone fractured by helplessness. And as Daniel's eyes filled with tears, he dropped to his knees, clawing at the dirt with his bare hands, ignoring how the soil under his nails felt worn and pulsed like living flesh. And the deeper he dug, the louder the whispering became, now mixed with muffled sobs and breaths, until suddenly the lantern flickered violently and the entire graveyard plunged into a suffocating darkness, so thick he couldn't see his own hands, but he could hear everything: the cries beneath the soil, the rustling of dead leaves, the wind turning into low moans weaving through the crooked gravestones. And then the voice changed, stretching unnaturally, shifting from his mother's trembling softness into something deeper, heavier, a distorted mockery of familiarity that murmured, "Why did you open it, Daniel?" Right before a freezing hand shot upward from the soil and wrapped around his wrist with bone-crushing force. Daniel screamed, trying to pull away, but the hand kept tightening, its fingers impossibly long and cold, enough to burn his skin, dragging him closer to the ground. As a second hand surfaced, then a third, clawing at him, pulling him toward the open pit that he himself had begun to dig. And the lantern's dim flame sputtered back to life, just long enough for him to see the thing emerging, a twisted, pale figure with sunken eyes and a mouth that stretched far too wide, its voice still using his mother's tone to plead, "Stay with me, Danny, please," while its real voice growled beneath it like a beast waking from centuries of hunger. Daniel fought with everything he had, kicking, screaming, dragging itself out of the shallow grave, its limbs bending wrong, its spine cracking in loud, wet snaps as it crawled toward him with terrifying speed. Yet just as it reached him, the cemetery bells, silent for 50 years, rang through the night, a deep metallic echo that froze the creature mid-movement, hissing as it recoiled, sinking back into the darkness of the grave, like smoke dissolving into water, and the soil closed over it, as if it had never been disturbed at all. Daniel, shaking violently, crawled to his feet and ran through the cemetery without stopping, without looking back, his chest burning, his eyes wet with confusion and the dark. Soft taps against the floorboards below his bedroom, breaths beneath his bed, and a voice so heartbreakingly familiar calling out to him, asking him why he left her there, and reminding him that graves, especially freshly disturbed ones, never forget those who touch them. Story 2. On a fog-heavy night in late October, a 29-year-old paramedic named Evelyn Carter was dispatched to the outskirts of the forgotten Willowmere Cemetery, a sprawling graveyard surrounded by dead pine trees and rusted fences that locals avoided even during daylight. And although the call she received simply reported a man screaming inside the cemetery, something in the dispatcher's trembling voice made her uneasy, as if the person on the other end had heard more than just a scream. When Evelyn arrived, the air felt unnaturally still, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break. And she grabbed her medical kit and flashlight, pushing open the creaking iron gate as the thick mist wrapped around her like cold fingers, muffling her footsteps as she walked deeper into the graveyard, where rows of ancient headstones leaned like broken teeth jutting out from the damp ground. And as she called out for the supposed victim, her voice echoed strangely, bending and stretching through the fog like it was being pulled apart, until suddenly she spotted something glowing faintly near the far edge of the cemetery. A lantern, swinging gently from a dying oak tree, its light flickering in a way that didn't match the windless night. And as she approached, she felt a wave of dread crash through her chest, because the lantern wasn't old or rusted like the rest of the cemetery. It was modern, clean, and recently lit, and just beneath it lay a fresh mound of soil, uneven and disturbed, as if someone had been digging frantically. Before she could process the scene, a shrill scream tore through the darkness, raw and agonizing, echoing off the gravestones so violently that Evelyn stumbled backward in shock, dropping her medical bag. And the scream sounded so human, so heartbreakingly terrified, that screaming stopped, replaced by faint sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere at once, swirling around her like the fog had found a voice. And as she opened the shed door, her flashlight flickered wildly, revealing old tools hanging from the ceiling, a shattered radio on the floor, and a trail of muddy footprints leading back toward the lantern. Her breath quickened as she followed the prints, which grew deeper and more erratic, as though the person had been running or limping in panic. And when she reached the lantern again, she noticed something she had missed earlier: a second set of footprints, larger, heavier, dragging through the soil as if something was being pulled beneath the ground itself. Evelyn crouched, her hands trembling, and that's when the lantern suddenly stopped swaying and pointed downward, toward the fresh grave, as though some invisible hand had grabbed it and turned it. Then came the whispering, soft. At first, a desperate murmur rising from the soil, forming broken words like help, help me, please, and against every instinct screaming at her to run, she grabbed her shovel from the shed and began digging, driven by the raw human need to save whoever was trapped beneath. The soil growing warmer the deeper she dug, until steam rose from the ground like breath from a sleeping monster. And as Evelyn's shovel struck something solid, wood, a coffin, she heard frantic banging from inside, frantic kicks, muffled screams so full of terror that tears spilled down her cheeks as she clawed at the wood, her nails bleeding as she tore the lid open. And inside, she found not a man, but a teenage boy, pale, shaking, dirt smeared across his face, who lurched forward gasping for air, clinging to her in hysterical sobs, repeating, "It wasn't human. It wasn't human. It put me in there." But before Evelyn could ask what he meant, a towering shadow rose behind him. Ra, stretching across the gravestones, tall, thin, its limbs impossibly long as its head tilted unnaturally to the side, watching them with hollow black pits where eyes should have been. The boy's screams returned, piercing the night as he pointed behind her, his voice cracking. "It's back!" And Evelyn spun around, her breath frozen, as the figure stepped closer without making a sound, the lantern's flame stretching toward it like it was being pulled, and the creature's mouth opened slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside, releasing a voice that wasn't one voice, but many, a layered chorus of every scream Evelyn had heard that night, all speaking at once, "Put him back." And the fog surged forward like a wave crashing around her legs as the creature lunged, grabbing the boy with claws that looked like sharpened bone, dragging him so fast the ground seemed to ripple beneath them. Evelyn grabbed him desperately, screaming for help, but the creature was too strong, pulling the boy toward the open grave as he shrieked her name, begging her not to let go. And with one final wrench, the creature yanked him into the darkness below, the soil collapsing shut with a sickening thud that echoed through the entire cemetery. The lantern shattered, plunging everything into pitch black, and the fog fell silent once more, leaving Evelyn alone, trembling uncontrollably, her clothes soaked with dirt and sweat. When police arrived hours later, they found her sitting at the cemetery entrance, staring blankly at the trees, her flashlight still flickering in her hand, whispering over and over, "There was a boy. I tried to save him. It pulled him back." But the officers found no grave disturbed, no footprints, no broken lantern, nothing but untouched earth. And to this day, Evelyn swears that sometimes, when she passes by Willowmere Cemetery on late-night emergency routes, she sees a lantern glowing faintly in the fog, swinging back and forth, like someone trapped beneath is still screaming for help. Story 3. For years, there was a particular grave in Blackwood Cemetery that the locals whispered about. A grave that, no matter how many times the groundskeeper sealed it, always appeared disturbed by the next morning, as if something inside refused to stay buried. And when Daniel, a night shift cemetery guard, was assigned to patrol the older section where it stood, he was told to avoid that area entirely after midnight. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who believed in rumors. So on his third night alone, armed with only a dim flashlight and a walkie-talkie filled with static, he decided to walk straight toward the grave everyone feared. Even though the fog was thick enough to blur the headstones and the cold felt unnaturally sharp. The grave belonged to a woman named Marla Reeves, who had died in 1974, something he had never seen before. The soil wasn't just disturbed. It looked like it had been pushed upward, as if something was trying to break out, not in. He knelt down to inspect it when he heard a soft, hollow knocking from beneath the earth, a slow rhythm, like someone weakly tapping from under a wooden lid. And Daniel's breath froze in his throat as the tapping grew louder, more desperate, until the ground shifted slightly under his hand, making him jerk back. His flashlight flickered violently, lighting the fog in rapid strobe flashes, and in each flicker, he caught glimpses of a pale hand pushing through the soil, thin, bony, trembling with effort, while a muffled, strangled cry rose from below, the sound of someone begging for help but unable to scream. He tried to run, but his legs felt like they had turned to stone, and then the hand burst out fully, clawing at the air, followed by another, both matted black hair. The figure lifted its head slowly, and through the strands, Daniel saw eyes that were milky white, but filled with unmistakable awareness, staring directly at him with a mixture of hatred and desperate longing. She crawled upward, her jaw trembling like she was trying to speak, and when her mouth finally opened, Daniel expected a scream, but instead, a faint whisper escaped. "Close it. Please, close it." As if she didn't want freedom, but feared something even worse beneath her. Before he could react, the ground behind her split open wider, and a second, darker shape began pulling itself upward, tall and twisted, with elongated fingers and a mouth stretched too wide, like a shadow wearing the shape of a human. The creature grabbed Marla's struggling body and dragged her back down, ignoring her desperate shrieks as she clawed at the earth, crying out for help. Daniel, soil, collapsing inward with a thud like a heartbeat, and everything went silent, except for his ragged breathing. When the morning crew arrived, they found Daniel sitting beside Marla's grave, shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak, pointing only at the headstone with wide, blank eyes. For days, he could only repeat one sentence to the police and cemetery staff. She didn't want to escape. She wanted the grave closed, and I was too late. Even now, the grave continues to disturb itself at night, as if the battle beneath it has never stopped. And the locals say if you listen closely after midnight, you can still hear Marla knocking, begging anyone above the ground to seal her in before the thing beneath her claws its way out.